Hi guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial where we are building this CMS application using ASP.NET Core 3 and Angular 10. In the last video tutorial, we implemented the user authentication handler and we placed the user authentication handler on the profile controller to protect the profile controller from unauthorized access. So we have prevented certain roles from accessing the profile controller. If you have not watched that video tutorial, I recommend you to go ahead and watch it so that you can understand how to create and implement authentication handlers in your API endpoints. In this video tutorial, we will be working on the forgot password functionality. So if a user has forgot their password, we should be able to send them a password that they can use to log in into their account, or they can reset their password. So currently the forgot password functionality is not yet created. We have just created the component, but we don't have any logic implemented. So let's go ahead and implement the logic for forgot password in our CMS application. So in the Angular application, we will go ahead and open the forgot password component in the component.ts file. Here, the first thing that we want to do is currently when we go to the forgot password page, the background image is still being shown. We have to go ahead and hide it. So let's implement the logic first so that when we go to the forgot password page, we don't see the background image that we have on the login page. So I will go ahead and implement that code. So I've implemented the code that will show the background image. It's similar to the register and login component. We are using the same image. If you want to use a different image, you can change the image and add the image to the assets folder. So here I'm going to call this method in the ngOnIt method that I have. And once I save this file, I should see the background image over here in the forgot password page. So now as you can see that the background image is loaded when the page is initialized. Next thing that I want to do is go ahead and create some controls that I would need. So when the user forgets their password, the only thing that we will request them to provide is their email address, and we will send the forgot password email to the user so that they can reset their passwords. So we don't need any other information other than the email. So I'm going to create a control for the email. So let's go ahead and create this form control. So here I have added the email form control. I've imported form control, validators, form group, and form builder from Angular Forms. So in the constructor, I have added the account service and the form builder service. The account service, that's because this account service is responsible to communicate with the backend API, and the form builder to build and initialize our form controls. Here I have initialized the form control and I have specified the validators as required and the validators for email. So I'm going to validate if the field is not blank or empty, and I'm also going to validate if it's a valid email address and not something else that is entered in the input field. Here I have initialized the form control using the form group. So the next thing that we would want to do is when the user submits the form, we have to call the backend API. So we need a onSubmit method. So I'm going to go ahead and create the method called as onSubmit. Here I have called this method as onSubmit. You can call this method anything that you like. So there is no hard code that you need to provide over here. So you can specify whatever name you want for your submit method when you are going to submit the form. So I've called it on submit, and I've called most of my methods that on the form as on submit. So I've followed a standard naming convention. So this method will be called when the forgot password form is submitted. We are going to place some logic over here now. So yeah, I have created the logic for the on submit method. First thing that I want to do from the form group, I am going to get the values of the form control and store them in this user info object. And the way I would do that is in the form group, we have a property called as value. When we call that property, all the form controls value, we can fetch it from the form group. So once we fetch that values, we will store them in this variable that we have created within this function called as user info. We will pass that variable to this method called as send forgot password email as the parameter. This method is not yet created in our account service. We will create it next, but we will call this method in our onSubmit method, and then we will wait for the response of the send forgot password email. If we receive a success response, then we will show a message to the user that will be like, please check your email for password instructions. We will show an bootstrap alert, and I'm creating that bootstrap alert using some jQuery. So that should be it for this particular uh, component. Also, if you are just watching this video tutorial, we have already added a video tutorial how to use jQuery in uh, your Angular application. So if you want to watch that video tutorial, it is a part of this video tutorial series. So now the next thing I will do is go ahead and also add the HTML for the forgot password and the CSS so that we have the forgot password form being shown to us on the forgot password component view. So let's go ahead and add that. So guys, I have added the HTML and the CSS that is required for this particular component. As you can see that now we have a password recovery form which will ask you or the user to provide their email address. Once they provide the email address, this form will be valid and we can then submit the form. So I've specified over here in the form that the submit button should be disabled until the form is invalid. Also, here we will call the onSubmit method when the insert form is submitted. So that's all we have in the HTML. We have some CSS just to uh, beautify the form, and you can change the design according to your requirement. So now we will go ahead to the account service because we need to implement this method so that we can get rid of this error. So we will go to the services folder, open the account service, and here we are going to create this send forgot password email method, and we are going to call the backend API from this method. So let's go ahead and implement this method. So here I have created the send forgot password email method, which requires the user's email, and we are passing that email from the form input to this method as parameter. Once the method is called, we will get this email from the parameter over here and pass it to the HTTP call that we are making. We are going to make a post call, HTTP post call, and we are going to call the endpoint base URL forgot password, which I have created over here, where we will be calling the account controller and the forgot password endpoint. We have not yet implemented this endpoint. We will implement it after we have finished with the Angular part. So now here we are going to pass the XSRF token in the headers, and also we are going to pipe the response. If there is a result, we return the result. If there is an error, we return the error. If you want to show the error to the users, you can uh, show the errors over here by specifying the errors and showing them in the uh, toast service like we usually do for the login component. So if I go to the login component here, if there is any error, we show it the errors in the toast service. So you can show the errors in the toast service. All you have to do is implement the toast service in the constructor. So let me add the missing import over here. This can be private, so not an issue. And here we can just show the message in the toast service to the user. If there is any error, we can just show a toast notification. So that's what I am going to show to the users. If there is any kind of error, I'll show an error processing this request. That's it. So now this should be it for the account service. We have implemented the logic. The endpoint call will be done once the method is called, but there is no endpoint created as of yet. If we go to the account controller API endpoint, there is no forgot password endpoint which we are trying to call from the Angular application. So let's go ahead and create this endpoint so that we don't get any errors when we try to call it. So I'm going to create it now. So here in the account control, let's create our endpoint. So here in the account controller API version 1, we have added the forgot password API endpoint. You would notice some errors. That's because we have not yet implemented these methods. We are going to call the user service uh, from the forgot password, and we are going to call the forgot password method, which we will implement in the user service, and we are going to implement this method in the user service. That's because we want to make sure that we can access this method from other controllers as well. If we define all the logic over here, then we have to define the logic once again in the other controller as well. So it's better to place the logic in the user service uh, that we have created, the class library, so we can access that method from any other endpoints or controllers that we have in our application. So now the next thing that we do is when this method is called, we will wait for the result. And if the result is valid, we will return a HTTP OK response back to the client stating that the uh, forgot password email was successfully sent. But in an event where the response is invalid, which means we could not find any user with that email, so we will not reveal to the user that the user does not exist, because someone must be using some other user's email, going to the forgot password page and trying to generate a forgot password link. In that event, if the user does not exist, we always need to protect the user's account. Therefore, we would not reveal that the user does not exist. We will always specify that the response was success and check the email if you have received any email for resetting the password. If there's any error that was caused due to some network failure or some other issues, then we can send a bad request over here as the response. So if we found the user, if the result is valid, we will generate a reset password URL that we will attach to the email and send it to the user. We will call the email service, and we have the send email method which we will use to send the email to the users. We have already implemented the email service method when we created the registered the user to send them the emails. So if you have not watched our video tutorial series completely, we have already added a video tutorial for implementing the email service, where I showed you how you can use Google as well as SendGrid to send email to your users. So go ahead and watch it if you want to know more about how to implement emails in your application. Here, while we are sending this email, we need to send a link in that email, URL in that email, which the users can click or copy and paste it in their browsers, and they can then go ahead and change their password by clicking on that link. That link is generated from the HTTP context accessor. We need the HTTP context accessor because we need to know our API endpoint, and then when we know our application URL, we can create a absolute URL. Now this method needs to be implemented. We will create this extension method. In this extension method, we are going to pass three parameters. First will be the HTTP context accessor, our URL, and some parameters that we need to pass. So I'm going to create this absolute URL static method inside a folder called as extension, and I don't want to create it over here once again, so that I can use this absolute URL method in some other classes or controller. Whenever I need to generate a absolute URL, I can use that method. So it's like an extension method that can be handy in other classes when you want to send emails or generate a URL string. So let's go ahead and create this extension method. We already have a folder called as extension, so we will go ahead and add a new class. We will call this class as URL helper extensions. So all the URL related extension methods that we want, we can place them over here. So these are static methods. We don't need to initialize this object or instantiate these objects. We can directly call them. So we are going to go ahead and create this new class. As I mentioned, this class will be a static class. So we don't need to create an object of this class. We can directly access it. We don't need the constructor as well. So we will get rid of it. Here we will create that absolute URL method that we are trying to access. So you have created the absolute URL method. Since I'm calling this method from the uh, class over here, which is my account controller, I'm also not instantiating this object. It's a static method, so I need this method to be static as well. So I have this method placed in a static class. This method is going to return a string. As we know, it's going to return a URL, generate a URL for us and return that URL so that we can add that URL in the email which we are going to send to the users when they click forgot password. So here we are passing the HTTP context accessor, the first parameter. Then we pass the URL, the relative URL that we are going to use to generate the absolute URL, and the object parameters like the user's ID and the code and the forgot email password code that we will generate from this result that we are going to send from this forgot password method, and I will show you how to do it. So here we will pass these three parameters. We will request the context accessor. We will generate the URL. If parameters are null, we will do a check for that, and then we will return the URL. So I've created an extension method here that will convert these parameters to dictionary. All we have to do is pass the parameters. So we will go ahead and place a breakpoint over here when the method is called, so you can see that how this logic works. So we can once again go through this absolute URL method in detail. So now I'm going to go back here. So here I need to add the reference to extensions so that I can access this method. And now we have to create this forgot password method in the user service. So let's go ahead and create this forgot password method over here. So here I have implemented the forgot password method, which will be called from our account controller. So in the user service, first thing that I'm going to do is create a response object, because I'm going to use this response object to send a response back to the uh, account controller so that it can further validate it. What is this response object? It's a generic response object that we use. We have created this method or class which contains three properties. First is valid string, a message related to the response, and if the response is valid or invalid, it's a boolean property. And finally, a dynamic property that can be anything, any type of data that is associated with the response. So we use this response object in many of these methods you will notice over here. That's because we want to send some response back to the uh, client that is requesting certain data. So here we can create our own generic response object, which we have done. Here, all we need to do is pass the user's email, where we go and find the user by using the user manager, ASP Netcore's user manager class. We use it to find the user by their email. If we don't find any users, as we mentioned earlier, we will we will not reveal the information that the user does not exist. But here you will also notice, while I'm also searching, if the user is not null, I'm also checking that the email is confirmed. If the user's email is not confirmed, then we should not allow them to change their password. First, they need to go ahead and confirm their email if it's a new registration. So we will also check that over here. So make sure you add this check as well. So we will generate a response and send back this response object. If we find a user, then we will go ahead and generate a password reset token. The user manager class, once again from our ASP.NET Core, has a inbuilt ASP.NET Core identity has a inbuilt method for generating password tokens, and we are going to call that method. So this method will generate a user token. All we need to reset password token, all we need to specify the user, the application user for whom we want to generate the password reset token. So we will pass that user as the parameter over here. Once the code is generated, we will attach that code to the response object. So we know we have something called as data in the response object, data property. We will create a dictionary with key value pairs where the code will be the value code and the user will be our application user, and we will return the response object. So we have a try catch block over here. In case if there is any exception raised, we will log it and we will return the response object as false is valid false, error and null. So pretty straightforward logic, nothing uh, here that should not be difficult to understand. If you go step by step, you should also uh, understand the process once again if you go through it. So the forgot password, I'll save this now. Next thing I want to do is, since I want to access this forgot password method over here, I need to place this forgot password method in the interface as well. So I'm going to copy this and go to the iUser interface and I'm going to paste it over here. So now we should be able to access it and we don't see any errors. So now we have uh, the logic placed over here. One more thing that is important, the forgot password, when we are sending the email, we need a email template. This email template with the following name is already created when we created the email service. So we knew that in this application we were going to create this functionality called as forgot password, and we need an email template for that. So we had already placed this email template in the email template folder. You can go ahead and edit this email template based on your requirement. It's basic HTML that you need to know to edit it. So I'm going to close this, and now the next thing that we want to do is the users, once they receive the email, they will click on the link that we are sending to them in that email. That link will redirect the user to a page where they can reset their password. So that's a standard process which most of the websites and applications follow. When a user requests forgot password, then we send the user a reset password link in their registered email address. Once they click on that email address or email link, they will be redirected to a page where they can reset the password. So now this link also is valid for a limited period. You have to note that user manager class that is generating that token, that code, it's not going to be valid for a long time. So within 24 hours, it is going to expire. So you can increase the time frame based on the settings of the user manager class. There are settings available, but I'm not going to go into detail. You can go through Microsoft's documentation and get more information on it. So here, now the next thing is, once the link is clicked, we will have to show a view to the users where they can reset the password. So now let's go ahead and implement that logic. So here I have created another method called as reset password. This method will be called by the user when they click on the link which we send them to through email, or if they copy the link and paste it in the browser, then this method would be called. Now we have to keep in mind that this method has the allow anonymous attribute. That's because the user might not be on our website. So if I go back to the browser here, for example, the user enters their email, we send the email. Then the user closes the browser, clears all their cookies, then goes to the email after a few hours, uh, opens their inbox and then clicks on the link. Here at this point, there might not be an anti-forgery token in the cookie because the user has cleaned up their cookies, cleaned their browser, opened a new session. So we would not have these two XSRF token that we create for validating anti-forgery in our application. We might not have this in the browser of the user. Therefore, if we check our Pro account controller, we are validating the anti-forgery tokens, correct? So we have to make sure that we request the tokens. We can actually put it over here for forgot password. That's because our forgot password, we are calling this from our Angular endpoint. So we will obviously attach the XSRF token, but here I have placed an allow anonymous. I don't need to do this because I have auto validate anti-forgery because that's only called on HTTP post methods and every other method except HTTP get. But still I like to place it over here because I am used to this particular style of coding. So if you don't want to place it, you will still be able to call it. But if you have only placed auto validate anti-forgery token on your entire class, if you have placed these on individual methods, then I recommend you to place this like this on the on the HTTP get as well. So just to make sure that there is no errors related to anti-forgery, otherwise you might get an error. So if you're following the same logic like me, where you have placed auto validate on the class level, then you would not need to do this because you will not have the error, because this will only be called on HTTP post and other methods except HTTP get. But if you have placed it individually, then you could do this something like which I had over here, which is allow anonymous. So I leave it like this because I don't know, some of you might have not followed the entire logic, and then you will go ahead and ask me questions in the comments that why it's not working. So here I will just place it as allow anonymous so that the anti-forgery token is not validated when we call this method from the URL that we are sending to the users in email. Now if you notice in this uh, reset password method, we are calling the I action instead of task, and we are calling the redirect to action. Now the redirect to action method is calling. Here you will notice that first we provide the action name and the controller. We don't have a controller called as password over here. We have API endpoints, but we don't have any controller. So we would have to create this controller and a view for this controller so that the users can see that view where they can enter their new password. So let's go ahead and create a new uh, controller class. So new file, this we will choose ASP.NET Core. We will choose a controller class. We will call this as password controller because that's the name of the controller we have specified as the second parameter here. If you want to call it something else, you can call it something else. I've called it password controller. So I'm going to create it over here. In the password controller, this is not an API, so be careful. This is a regular controller with a view, whereas the API will not have any views associated with them. So this is a controller where we need to generate a view for this controller, which we are going to do soon. So the first thing that I want to get rid of from this controller is the index view, because we are not going to call the view as index. We are going to call the view as reset password. So let's go ahead and create this view. So I have created this view called as reset password, and we are receiving the model in our parameters, the reset password view as the parameters. We are passing it to that method. So we are going to receive that. We have already created this reset password view model when we were working on the admin panel, because our admin needed to reset user passwords, and therefore we needed this model class. So we have already created this. If you have skipped the video tutorial series and just watching this particular video tutorial, then you can go ahead and watch the reset password functionality which we have implemented for the admin panel, and you will understand how we use the reset password view model. In this particular scenario, we are using the same view model because the view model has the required properties like email and the code which we are going to send to the users. So here now we have the reset password view which we are passing to this action method, and this action method is located in the password controller which we just created. Next thing that we want to do is we also need access to user service, so we are going to inject it using dependency injection. So yeah, I have injected the user service object or the service that we are going to use. Now guys, when the user clicks on the link, we show them a reset password view which contains the form where they can enter the uh, new password and then submit that new password so it gets updated in our database. Now when they click submit, we need to make sure we have another action method here for that form. which is called as update password in this scenario where we are going to update the user's password. So let's go ahead and create that action method. So here I have created that method called as update password, which will be called when the user wants to update the password, when they have filled out their new password. And then in the user service, we are going to create a method called as reset password, where we will pass the new details so that it gets updated. We will implement this method. We have not yet created it. This method is going to send us a result. Once again, it's a response object. If the result is valid, then we redirect the user to the confirmation page or the confirmation view for the reset password. And if there is an error, then we will return a bad request. So let's go ahead and implement this reset password method in the user service so that we get rid of this error which tells us that it's not yet implemented. So let's go ahead and implement the reset password. So here I have created the reset password method, which will require us to pass the reset password view object, which contains the properties, which is the email, the password, the confirm password. So they will enter the password once again, the code that was used, because the code needs to be valid. If the user tries to access the page after a certain time, the code will be invalid. So, and the old password. Now the next thing that we want to do, so now in this case the old password would not be necessary because the user has forgot their password, so we are not going to validate it. So even if this is null, it's not going to be an issue, but we are using this same model in other classes where we pass the value of the old password. But in this particular scenario where the forgot password, we are using the same model, so we would not need the old password. So this value will certainly be null in that particular scenario. So now we go to the password controller, to the user service. Here first, once again, we create the response object because we need to send it back to the method. We are going to enter an activity in the activity table that the user is trying to update their password, so the user is notified if someone else is trying to access the account. We have a try catch block. If there's an exception, we log the error, and here we'll find the user by their email. If we find the user, we will go ahead and generate the password. We will enter the activity in the activity table, and we will return the response object. If we cannot find the user, we will not reveal that the user does not exist. The response object will be failed, and we will go ahead and return the response object. So here you can see that the result object over here, I'm using the user manager. Once again, the user manager class, which is part of ASP.NET Core Identity, has an inbuilt method for you called as reset password. So if you are using ASP.NET Core Identity in your application, you will have access to this reset password async method. If you have implemented membership in your ASP.NET Core project using ASP.NET Core Identity, so we can make use of this reset password async method. We can pass the application user, the code and the password, the new password, and it would get updated in the database. So if it is updated successfully, we will receive a succeeded property, which is basically part of the identity result. It's a Boolean property. If this is true, that means the password was changed. If this is false, means there was some error, password was not changed, either the code was invalid or the user, some details, some errors, we don't know. So if it's invalid, it returns the succeeded value will be false, and therefore we will set the message as failed and return the response object. So that's all for the logic of reset password. So in this particular tutorial, we have implemented two methods: forgot password and reset password. For forgot password, we use the generate password token of user manager, and for reset password, we use the reset password method. So now these two methods are implemented. Once again, I have to add this method to the interface so that we don't see the errors in the password controller over here. Now we have successfully created these action methods for our controllers. We need to create views because we are returning these views, and we need to have these views. So in ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET MVC, we have controllers and we have views. So each controller has an associated view. So we have to place those views in the views folder. So if you notice here, we don't have views folder, we have pages. We are not going to use the pages. We want to add the views folder. So we will go ahead and create the views folder. So I'm going to get rid of these pages, or you can keep it if you need it, but we don't actually need it in this project. You know what, I'll just leave it here and I'm going to create the views. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new folder. So let's add a new folder and I'm going to call this new folder as view. Now in this view, we need to create the view for password controller. So we need to create a folder and we have to name it the same as the name of our controller. So we are going to add a new folder and call this password. So all the views associated with password controller, we are going to create them in password folder. So let's go ahead and create it. So we are going to right click on this password folder, add a new file. We are going to go to the web option. We are going to add the empty uh, HTML file. Actually, we need to add a CSHTML file because it's a view. So we need to add a razor view. So we will call this not as index, but the name of the view, which is reset password. And we are going to hit new. We also need to add another view. If we go back to the password controller, we are returning the reset password confirmation view as well. So we need to create this. So add new file. We will go and add a razor view. Call this as reset password confirmation and hit new. We now need to have a shared folder where we can place the layout. If you have watched the admin panel tutorial that we had created for this video tutorial series, in the areas we have followed the same structure where we have the controllers, the view. The views contain the shared folder and the layouts associated with the views. So in ASP.NET MVC, we need to specify the layout that we are going to use for the views in the application. So we have not specified any layout for our controllers action views over here. So we are going to do that. So let's right click on this and add a new folder. We will call this folder as shared. So all the layout files, we have to place them in this folder, and you cannot name this folder something else. It has to be called as shared, and all the layout files you will place them over here. So I'm going to click shared, all the shared layout files. So I'm going to add a layout file. So right click, add a new file, and I'm going to choose razor layout. We will not change the name. I leave it as underscore layout and they create new. So this is a partial view. This does not need any controller. Here in the layout, you can specify the layout, how you want the header or the footer or the sidebar, anything that you implement, how you want it to be seen on the browser. You can implement that view over here in this layout. It will be shared across all the views that you create in this particular application, other than the areas, because areas contains their own set of actions and views. So here I have changed the layout to match the layout I want in this particular views. I don't have a footer here, but I have a head and a body. And here you will implement or add all the files that you want to be loaded. Like in this case, I'm going to use Bootstrap. So files associated with Bootstrap, I have added them over here, referenced them over here. Bootstrap, I'll be using a Sweet Alert pop-up to notify the user. So you have to specify those over here so that they are loaded, like Font Awesome. So whatever frameworks that you use, you have to specify in this layout file if you want those frameworks or those layouts to be loaded on all the views. If you want them on certain views only, then you don't need to add them here. But for now, I need these particular frameworks and styles on all my views, so I have placed them over here. Next thing that I want to do is I have created the layout file. I also need some validation scripts. So we will be using the jQuery unobtrusive validation, which we have already used in the admin panel to validate our forms. So our forms have some inputs. We need to validate those inputs and show messages to our users in case they add some invalid data. In Angular, we use reactive programming, so we can show the error to the user uh, in Angular itself. But in this Razor, we are going to use jQuery unobtrusive, which will do the same for us in this particular Razor page, so Razor view. So let's go ahead and create that partial view so that we can use it. So yeah, I'm adding another Razor view. It's called validation scripts partial. I have used the same naming convention for the areas as well, where I have added the validation scripts and put all the validation scripts inside a partial view called as validation script partial. So I'm going to create this partial view. Here I'm going to get rid of these comments and I'm going to place my code. So here I have placed the code or the references that I need in my views. So I'm going to use jQuery validation framework for validating the inputs. We have already installed it and used it in the admin panel. So we are not going to go into details what it does, but we will be using it in the forms that we are creating to reset the password. And we have installed these scripts already. If you go to the lib folder in the root, you will see all these scripts because we have used them in the previous video tutorial. And you would need these uh, scripts so that you could validate the inputs. If you want to create your own custom validation or use your own custom validation, you can use that as well. We'll be using jQuery validate, which is already installed in our project, so we are going to use it. In the development and non-development version, we have specified to use the minified and non-minified version. So now let's save this file, save, close this validation and layout file since we are not going to edit it any further. In the reset password.cshtml file, I'm going to go ahead and delete these contents and I'm going to place my code over here. So here I have created the reset password view. I have placed some style, CSS styling on the form controls, and I have the email field, the password field, and the confirm password field. I have the submit button on this particular view, and when the submit button is clicked, the action method uh, update password is set over here with the controller name as password. Here, if you notice in the script section, I have loaded a script called as forgot password, which I need to add now. This script will do all the validation for us using jQuery unobtrusive. So we have to specify the logic in this particular file. So to create this script, we have to go to the lib folder of our root, then the custom folder, JS folder, and in the account folder, we are going to create this forgot password JS file, our JavaScript file, which will contain the JavaScript. So I'm going to add this new file and I'm going to call this new file. I need a JavaScript file over here, so web, and I'm going to call this file as forgot password. So the next thing in this forgot password I have to do is add some logic or some methods that I would need, and I'm going to do that using some jQuery. But the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and create an empty reset password object, which I'm going to fill when I get the values from the form. So here is the object. I've created it. I've called it as reset password data. It will contain a property called as email, password, the confirm password, and the code that the user is going to use. Now here we are going to use some jQuery. First thing we will check if the document is ready. Then we will go ahead and add some event listener. So here I have set the document.ready shorthand for jQuery, where we will check when the DOM is ready. We will set a event listener which will check when the submit button is clicked. An event will be fired. So note that in ASP.NET Core Razor, when you click the button, the page will be reloaded or refreshed. Therefore, we want to first prevent the default functionality of that click event, and we don't want the page to be reloaded because we want to make an AJAX call to the endpoint. So I first called the event.prevent default method. Then I'm going to check if the form is valid. The form that we are going to submit. It is called as reset password form, and we are going to check if this reset password form is valid. So to check the form is valid, we need to get all the values from the form controls. So in the method over here, I have a dot valid method that I'm calling on the form. This dot valid method, it's part of jQuery unobtrusive. We have already loaded this script in the validation script of the HTML layout. So we will have access to this dot valid method. So any form tag or form element that you have on your DOM, if you call the dot valid method on that particular uh, form, it will tell you if the form is valid or invalid. And how would this jQuery unobtrusive would know if the form is invalid or valid? That's because if you go to the form, I've placed the validation tags over there in the span tags. So validation, ASP validation attributes in the span tags. So that's how we will know if the form is valid or invalid, because when we call the reset password view model, here we have some initial checks that we do using the data annotations that we have placed over here. So we are doing a check over here, and if any of these checks fail, then these validation tags will fail as well, will return a failed response. So now in the method or in the uh, JavaScript file here, then we have created a form data object. We have serialized all the values and saved them in form data. We call the validate controls method over here, which we pass the form data, and we do some custom validation as well before we submit the form. We don't just depend on the so the server side validation alone, we cannot be responsible on it. So we do some initial validation as well using some JavaScript over here. I'm validating the form values. Here the password that I am checking is based on these parameters. So if you are wondering how these password parameters are set, it is set in the startup class, that how we want to use the password, use a password in ASP.NET Core Identity, and you can go ahead and check it. It was already explained in the previous video tutorials. I'm passing the request verification token over here from the form, but I need to change this name from the form itself. That's because I have implemented a XSRF token as well. So if you go to the HTML of these reset password, here you will notice that we are injecting the anti-forgery token, but this anti-forgery token is the anti-forgery token from ASP.NET Core. It's not the custom anti-forgery token that we are setting. So it's this anti-forgery token that you see here. We have also added an additional anti-forgery token over here, which we use for incoming requests. It's called as the XSRF token. So you can use the XSRF token itself, and you don't need to use this. But if you have not implemented XSRF, then you can use this just to prevent any CSRF attacks depending on your implementation. For this application, we have implemented XSRF custom. So if I do not send this and just send this, it should still work. But I will leave it as it is. I've added the XSRF and the request verification token in case if some people find if they have not implemented this, then they might get an error. So I've just added this. So I'm passing this token, and one more thing that I forgot to do in the password controller was when the update password method is called, it's called from our website itself. So we have to place the validate anti-forgery token attribute over here to prevent any CSRF attacks. So I'm going to save this file once again, go back to the forgot password. Here I'm going to get the cookie. So I'm going to create this method that is going to get the cookie from the browser called as XSRF token and place it in the header for me. So here at the bottom, I have placed this extension method that will get the cookie from the browser and with the name XSRF token and add it to the headers. Then we have placed our logic here. We call the endpoint, which is the URL in the action method, in the action attribute that we have defined over here. the update password method, which is in the password controller. So we are targeting this action attribute, and this action attribute will generate the URL for us that we need to access. We make an AJAX call, and based on the response, we show appropriate view on the uh, to the user. So if the response was success, we generate a sweet alert pop-up, and we ask the user that their password has changed, and we redirect them to the login page. We provide a button which they can click, and if not, we display the error. So that's all we have in this forgot password.js file. Also, in this reset password, we have specified that we are calling the minified version of this file. Therefore, in the we have already implemented the bundling and minification in this project. There is a video tutorial for that as well, in case if you want to know how to do it. There's a bundle config file over here which we need to update. So here I will add this new attribute or new property for the forgot password. So the output file will be called as forgot password, and the main file that needs to be minified is the forgot password.js. So that's how you will add it over here. So when you build your project, the minified version also will be created for the forgot password. Now we will go back to the CS/HTML. We have implemented this. We will save our files, our scripts. Now we will go ahead and test this functionality. If everything works fine, then we can set the reset password confirmation page as well. In this particular scenario, I don't think we would need a reset password confirmation, because if we have to send the users to the confirmation page, then we can change this in the forgot password.js, because we want the users to manually click on the button and go to the login page. But we will implement that. So for now, I will leave it as it is, the reset password confirmation. Let's go ahead and first test this. And if everything works fine, then we can work on the reset password confirmation so that the users can see the confirmation. So let's go ahead and build our application to make sure that there is no errors. So the build was successful. Let's go ahead. And also, we need to update one more thing before we run the application, which is the app settings file. Since we are going to send emails to our users, I'm going to go to the app settings files. Here in the app settings file, we need to update the options before we send the email. So we will not receive any emails if we have not set the username and password over here. So if you have downloaded the source code, you have to create a SendGrid account with the key and password. And there's a video tutorial for that as well. So you can watch that. And you have to update this and rebuild your project so that the emails can be sent. So I'm going to use SendGrid and set the default email service as SendGrid, set it to true, and update these values. So I will not show you my username and password. So you have to create your own. So we will go ahead and now test this application. So the application is loaded. I've clicked on the forgot password link on the login form. Here I'm going to specify my email address, which is going to be the email address where I'm going to send the email. So here I'm going to send an email to the email address associated with the user's account, because I, for example, have forgotten my password and I'm the user tech234. That's my email address. So I'm going to go to the forgot password or password recovery form, and I'm going to place this email address here, and I'm going to click submit. Now there was a breakpoint over here that we had initially placed when we were working on the absolute URL. So I'm going to click here and then hit continue. Here you can see now there is a URL generated for us, which when the user will click, will be redirected to appropriate view that we have created. You can see at the end there is a user ID and a code associated in this link that we are going to send to the user. So I'm going to hit continue now and go back to the application. Here there was a message that popped up to check the email address, which kind of disappeared, which we have to fix. But now we will go ahead and check the email address to see if we have received an email. So here I have received an email. So this email is basically the email that I'm going to click, which will contain a link. So as you can see here, it says reset password. You have recently requested to reset the password. This is the email template that we have used. Here is the link that is embedded on this button. So when I click this button, I should be able to see the view. So I'm just going to copy the link, not click here because I'm on a different browser. So I'm going to paste this link over here and I'm going to hit enter. Now you can see the form that uh, I created using the ASP.NET Core MVC view, but I have not placed the CSS for this form and therefore we don't see any styling. Let me fix this. So the reason the CSS did not load in this particular view is because in the ASP.NET Core MVC framework, here when we create views and we have a layout file that is implemented for the views, we need to add the view import file, which I forgot to do. So if you look at the views folder, we have a shared folder, but we don't have the views import file that should be placed here so that the views can be imported. So let me place that file, view import and view start. That's needed for the layout file to load on our views. So I'm going to go ahead and add them. So right click, add these files. I'm going to go ASP.NET Core. I'm going to click on the view start, add this, and I'm also going to add the view import file. And then I'm going to hit new. In the view import file, you can see the code is added already for the views. And the view start, we have the layout file, that's the default naming. And we have used the same naming convention, so we don't have to change anything here as well. Now I'm going to save this and rerun the application. So the application is reloaded. Now I'm going to reload this link. And now you can see once I reload this link, the CSS has been applied because the layout has been applied for this particular view. So this is how this particular password reset form will look in the browser. I've implemented the CSS. Here you can see the email field is required. That is done by jQuery unobtrusive. That's the validation scripts that we have used. So here we will specify the email for the user. For the password, let's set the password as test at 12345, and I'm going to retype the password test at 12345. Now I'm going to submit this form. So the form is submitted and the suite alert is loaded. Once again, the suite alert CSS styling is not loaded. That's why you are seeing this kind of uh, style error, or I would call this the style not being properly set, which I have to fix. But here you can see the functionality is working. I was able to change my password. Now I need to go ahead and click on the login button. So I didn't need the confirmation page. In case if you want the user to be redirected to the reset confirmation page, then you can go ahead and in the uh, JS file that we have created, the JavaScript file, instead of loading the suite alert, you can redirect the user to the action method, which is reset confirmation, and you can create a view for reset confirmation password. And I have created the view, you can just add the HTML for that. But I think we don't need it here, so I'm not going to spend time on that. But it's up to you. If you want it, you can use the view instead of suite alert. And for suite alert, in the files which we reference, so in the shared folder of the layout, here the suite alert CSS was not loaded, which I need to fix. So let me go ahead and fix it for development. Okay, so I have not loaded the CSS file for Sweet Alert. That's why the CSS was missing. So I'm going to place the reference over here. So now I've added the reference to Sweet Alert CSS, the minified and the non-minified version for development and non-development uh, production environments for our application. Now I should not see that CSS, the error that I see in the alert pop-up. So I should see the Sweet Alert designed well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retest the forgot password functionality. So I am going to once again stop and run this application. So all the scripts are loaded fine. Going to go back to the application. In the meantime, I'm just going to copy this email address and make sure that I go to my inbox and delete this so we can test from scratch. So application will load now. So the application is loaded. We will go back to the Angular app here in the login form. We'll click forgot password. We will go ahead and click the submit option over here, provide our thing. We have this breakpoint here that we forgot to remove. So we'll go ahead and hit continue. We'll go back to the application. Here we see a success message which says, please check your email for password reset instructions. So assuming we are going to go to the email, we received an email. I see me because my send and from email address is the same. So you can change it so you will see something else over here. In the app settings, my from email address and the to email address is the same. So I see this me over here. I can click this. Now I can see the reset password. I'm going to copy this link over here, go back to this page, paste this link, hit enter. Now I should have this. I'll enter my email address for that specific user that I'm created for testing purpose. Paste it over here. The new password is test at 123456, test at 123456. I'm going to hit submit. So there is some caching issues because the CSS did not load. Well, I have to do an hard reload, but I have fixed the issue, so you should not see the issue once again. And I'm not going to test it once again. So I will fix that issue. It's due to the caching, I guess, because in my network now I cannot see it, but yes, the CSS files were not loaded. So now if I go back to the login page in my application and I enter the new password, which is test at 123456, I should be able to log in because the password is now successfully changed, and I can go and check my profile settings and also the activity log. So there are two password change because we changed it twice while testing, and you can see the entry in the activity feed. So in this way, I have shown you how to implement change password functionality. Do not forget that the reset password confirmation, I have not set it, but the view is created. If you don't want the sweet alert pop-up, you can change this sweet alert to redirect to your confirmation view that we have created. So this should be it for this video tutorial. In this video tutorial, we learn how to implement forgot password functionality and to reset the user's password. If you have any questions, use the comment section and I will answer those questions. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. It takes a lot of effort to write these many lines of code and then present it to you on YouTube for free of cost. All we ask from you is to please subscribe and like our video tutorial, subscribe to our channel. So thank you once again for following and liking our videos, and we will see you in the next video tutorial where we will be implementing additional functionality in this CMS application. Thank you.